You can just tie product engineering incentives to the products or the company's outcomes, because this will make people think how is what they're doing impacting the bottom line. And incentives will then help you align people more than the perfect framework or the perfect planning process, because there's no such thing in real life.
Hello and welcome to the Product People podcast. Here we learn from the most amazing people in the product space for 30 minutes at a time. My name is Romoita, and today we bring you the highlights of a talk by Mirela Mus, hosted by Utkasha, and recorded live at one of our community events. Mirela is the founder and CTO of Product People, and she has had several product management and coaching roles in big organizations in various different industries. At Product People, our mission is to help companies discover and deliver great products faster. We do that by doing hands-on product management work at companies of all sizes, and also by sharing knowledge generously with our community of more than 20,000 product enthusiasts. To find out more about us and access our community, check our website, getproductpeople.com, or head over to our YouTube, LinkedIn, or Meetup pages. You can find all the links in the episode description. I leave you now with Mirela and with Kasha. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Why product-led growth? Before why, maybe giving a short definition of this, because I know different people call it different things. In our view, it's a distribution model where product management helps sales and marketing achieve higher top line revenue and margins. And especially in B2B, this also changes the existing model where you would rely heavily on sales and marketing. A few more details. In this distribution model, the product itself is expected to do the selling, either by way of demoing, onboarding, or upselling its current capabilities. It's also a cost-effective way to acquire new clients through different levels of self-service, organic growth, and word of mouth. And if you think about that, probably referrals come to mind, right? Then give 10, get 10 euros, or do this, get that type of tactics. It also frees up sales and customer success internally to focus on larger enterprise client accounts instead of chasing potentially unqualified leads, because through this, since the client can self-onboard and self-upgrade, you're going to get enough data or very promising accounts that it's worth spending more of the internal time on, rather than trying to guess which one of these accounts will be worth. So a bit of a example on how we got here. We started off with on-premise many years ago, and that was top-down, sold to CIOs, Chief Information Officer. Then we migrated to the cloud era, where it was still top-down, but not as top-down. And now we're in the part where there are a lot of things that get themselves into organizations through ways of employees. So employees end up adopting or trialing certain tools like Slack or Figma or Miro, and then persuade their bosses to pay for it, which was unheard of in the past. We went on from this got sold to the CIOs into an employee pesters their boss to upgrade their Slack subscription. So some numbers on why product-led growth is worth considering for companies who make less than 250 million. It's shown a median revenue growth of 46% on a study of that being conducted for 21 versus 2020. It then also goes as high as 47% for companies who make more than 1 billion, and the non-product-led growth having slower revenue growth than that. But growth is not the only thing, right? You're interested also to make money, meaning how much higher margins could you have? And we see that there are more product-led growth companies which exceed the rule of the 40, meaning growing over 40% with more than 40% margin. In some cases, even 50%. And that's super impressive because most of the growth comes at high cost or at a loss. So being able to grow super fast and at the same time have a high margin, it's something a lot of companies want to do. And at the same time, you want to get the money that you spent in acquiring customers back. And in the product-led growth model, this is by OpenView Financial, an article they published in about 2021. In the product-led growth model, you get your customer acquisition money back sooner than in a non-product-led growth model. So now a few principles or tactics to drive this. The most you probably seen or think about is the freemium. You try something out, and then if you're using it more or after a certain time or after a certain point, you need to pay. And that cutoff is in the better product that's done at the point where they've got you hooked, where you see enough value that you would want to unlock more. So think about Slack's cap at 10,000 messages, where they've measured that from there on, you're using it enough that you're getting value out of it and you're willing to pay. Similar with Notions, they had this 1,000 block limit after which you would also need to pay, or in the B2B side, you just need to pay to add more people into your space, which is everything you want to use this tool for in any company. The other part that has changed, considering there's like no human to persuade you, you need transparent pricing and contact terms. Also the ability to self-service within payment renewals, especially up to some point. So we see a lot of product-led companies that have multiple pricing tiers. So they could have the free model, then 2 of the paid tiers for smaller companies, for mid-sized companies, and only at enterprise level, you are encouraged to talk to sales, but not before that. So all of that is self-service, where you can change from one tier to another, renew your contract, switch from monthly to yearly at different costs or incentives, and pay for it. Well, one key component is also shorter time to value, because there's no one to handhold the prospective clients. So it means they will churn very fast. If your copy is confusing or your onboarding funnel is clunky, or they don't get enough value out of using this very fast and they don't get what it's about, they're going to churn. So this would be in the product-led growth models. These are the paths that need to be over and over and over again, because it's a huge choke point and there's no one else to catch the user once they fall through. And to ensure the growth and margins at a lower cost, this is where referrals and recommendations come in, because you want to make your users or your clients bring in new users and new clients without you relying on marketing spend or on sales teams to lure them in. This is a very cool article Elena Verma wrote on Amplitude, where she proposes a merge between trial freemium called reverse trial. So basically having the option to put more people into your growth loop by ways of combining those. So this is just an example, because many times companies think, hey, should I do a trial? Then after this 30 days or so, it starts getting paid, or should I do freemium and then try to upsell via freemium? There's also the option to do both. So have a look at that if this is something you're considering for your product. And now there's also the impact on organizations. So we'll start with marketing. The way traditional marketing is done is that they're at the awareness acquisition stages of the funnel. It means that after that, there's a handover of what traditionally is called the marketing qualified lead that goes to sales or someone else to process. In a product-led growth model, marketing is everywhere, right? So the messaging needs to be consistent throughout your product to make people aware, acquire them, activate them, retain them, get their money, and then get them to refer you. So it can't just be pushing people into a funnel. And probably you've also seen some of these landing pages where once you click on a CTA, it takes you to the product. The product doesn't look like anything like the marketing landing page, or the copy is very different, or the value proposition is very different. So that's an example of the traditional model where marketing would build up all these landing pages and then like shut people down into a product that is relatively disconnected from what they're trying to pitch there, or as they're mostly optimizing towards creating those leads, they're not optimizing towards creating recurring revenue from users, which is what you want. So that is part that changes, meaning that marketing needs to be more involved and work closer with product. Then you also have the growth PM role, who has become quite popular over the last years, where he's taking a bit more of the marketing responsibilities and having and working closely with a product development team to drive more growth for the product. And what are the changes for sales? So in many cases, people assume that you sack the sales team, there's like no one else left. No, on the contrary, you are able to create more opportunities for the sales team. So this is a graph on the tools used by product-led growth businesses. And you see that many of them, once they pass over 1 million, they are using sales tools, meaning that they have Salesforce in-house that uses either Salesforce the tool or Pipedrive or HubSpot or additional related tooling for this. I discovered this via Tarin's blog, where she also has a few other interesting articles on this topic. And the way this scope changes for sales is that instead of using very aggressive tactics, and also how we talked about marketing, just doing a lot more aggressive, pushing people into the funnel, similar here, sales would switch to a role of education, coaching, and support in a way to expand the usage of this account or relate to more senior leadership within larger organizations to drive the adoption of the tool, but won't be the ones chasing after very small accounts to convert, because it is expected that the product itself does that, and else it needs to be fixed, because if the basic mechanics of it aren't working, then that's a different problem that sales cannot solve for the company. So sales remains, and sales now has time freed up to focus on larger accounts and more interesting customers, or moving up that stream. The same is also for customer success, which in many B2B businesses means renewals, retentions, or to some degree expansions, because again, they can look at the utilization or the growth of the number of licenses, for example, people would buy in 1Password or in Miro, and then approach these companies with their enterprise plan or with other offerings that they may have not considered because they were a smaller company at some point and they went the self-service route. We've also noticed at a few clients where they're doing everything Microsoft, right? Established companies, Microsoft is the chosen vendor for everything. So it means that they should be using Microsoft Teams for chatting. And we did notice that that client has both Microsoft Teams and Slack, because the product and development team didn't want to use that one and started using Slack. And at some point, someone paid for it. So it also shows how popular this is, that it basically managed to car demand while there was already a vendor that locked in their client into using Microsoft Teams. And this is to their bottom-up approach, similar to Figma, where they changed the way designers work within companies by simplifying this workflow, and you just send a Figma link instead of having to export files back and forth. So if we look at Slack, then there are a lot of things that they did right, so that this doesn't even attempt to summarize it, but their goal was making team communication easily accessible and widely used by knowledge workers. So the freemium model helped people bring in their colleagues. And once you've brought in a few colleagues and you're talking with them, then others are also curious to see what you're talking about. And there's a bit of FOMO. So they also onboard. And the way they've made that easy, but also secure for companies, is that you can sign up based on the domain name, right? So if your email address is something at getproductpeople.com, then only this email address is allowed to join our Slack space. So that made it easy to onboard users while not requiring any buy-in or support from the rest of the organization, which are usually bottlenecks. And then help also create this network effect. While people would see that this is used, then more people would join. So you just needed a few coworkers who start using it, then others would collaborate with them would join. The other part is that they've also allowed an integration marketplace, bringing work into Slack. So think about the Jira bot that notifies you that someone commented on your ticket, or integration with Notion or Miro or Asana, or kind of anything that you're using at work. You can get a Slack notification for it. You can create a ticket or an item there from Slack. So there are lots of things that you can do while not leaving Slack and still being there. Okay, so now we go to the last part on what you could do in your organization right now. So this is by no means exhaustive, or in some cases it may not apply to your context, because I've gotten the first thing to say PMs should be responsible for the product's profit and loss. And then people will like, whoa, we can't have that. Can we try something else? And like, sure, you can also try something else, and you can just tie product engineering incentives to the products or the company's outcomes, because this will make people think, how is what they're doing impacting the bottom line? And incentives will then help you align people more than the perfect framework or the perfect planning process, because there's no such thing in real life. And the other part, which is very easy to say, very hard to do, is creating these empowered cross-functional teams. Which is again, right? Marty Kagan wrote the book about it, so it's a lot to say on how to do it. It also helps more if people have their promotion and incentives align with your company. Charlie Munger had this interesting insight in one of his writings, where at some point, probably was UPS, which was a logistic company in the US, was not able to get people to finish their shifts and their 8-hour shifts throughout the night. One of the reasons they saw was that because people were earning by the hour. So it means when they were 6 hours in and it was late in the night, they would be like, okay, I'm done, I'm home. And what they changed is move the payout at the end of the shift, which means people would finish the 8-hour shifts they were at, right? People at some point didn't have the incentives to finish the whole shift. Once they changed into that, they had a better completion rate, and then the workers also got paid the full shift. So that would be a very basic and simple example. It's harder to do that with product and engineering as is knowledge work, but it also helps if the team understands what they're working towards, what are the revenue and cost drivers for your product and your company. The CPO of Clue has also a pretty good talk that's already on our YouTube that is around fall in love with profit and loss. And I think this is a very good advice for PMs and for everyone in tech in general. There's also a little bit to say about the mindset, but again, I would strongly advise towards looking at incentives and how teams are structured, because the mindset can also be bullshitted. Yeah, everyone is data driven, everyone does continuous discovery, but yet they don't, and yet things don't work out. But of course, these are all very good if you do them and if you do them consistently. And again, we cannot stress enough on the empowered product, but also engineering teams that they're aligned with what you want to do and they're interested to move things along. And then how to get started. It's worth mentioning that it works when you have a product market fit. If you're trying to figure out what you should be doing, then don't apply product-led growth, because this is a distribution tactic for when you know that you have something successful and you want to double down on it. There are a lot of ways of going to product market fit, which are not the scope of this talk, so I will jump over it. But be aware when you're applying this, make sure you have figured out that your product has market fit already, has achieved product market fit. Then look at what are the drivers of growth and what are the main metrics that you're looking at: customer lifetime value, activation, retention, and so on. And map your growth loops, try to enforce and make them stronger. Then, of course, the hard part, rinsing and repeating and iterating on that. So a summary, why go for product-led growth? The companies who've done that have seen up to 32% faster revenue growth. They outperform in the rule of the 40, combined sales growth rate and EBITDA margin of at least 40%. They grow efficiently with a lower customer acquisition cost. And how to do that? Do cross-functional collaboration first, tie incentives of the employees to outcomes, and favor speed and impact over outputs. Also in a way that you think and communicate and promote and reward people within the organization. I'm aware that there are a lot of companies where it's just such a huge outcome to barely ship something, and everything is so intertwined and blocked and full of legacy code and legacy structure that even getting something to see the light of day amazing and impressive. And I'm sad for the PMs that are stuck there, but it's still worth figuring out that what you're putting through and doing all that work for, it's still worth doing. So even if it's very hard to ship anything within your organization, you should still be wary of things that make sense and figure out faster or easier ways to do that, despite the the lag that some organizations have. And we've seen that also in our engagements.
So, just a quick question on PLG for a product manager to grow their skill sets in that area. What's the advice there in terms of like, what do they need to have in their skills repertoire aside from just practical experience? Anything they can, like sharpen on?
Look at things where you can apply that in the current product that you're working on. It's also part of the commercial acumen and understanding. So I'm referring more to B2B and understanding what are the drivers for consideration and purchase. How are you currently bringing in your product clients and retaining or upselling them, and then understanding how you could do that more so on autopilot or expanding these accounts without needing to talk with people, right? Because having people in the loop, it creates lag and is also expensive. So it's more also to some degree cost and growth optimization and looking at things where you could bring that. So I'm not sure if you're already working as a PM, but even if you're not working as a PM, you can think of different tactics you could propose to the product team that could have that benefit, and then understand maybe also from their objective or objections or their context how that could work or how you could make that work. So that I cannot give you a good example without you saying, hey, I work at B2B Series C company where we do this and that, and then what can I do as a PM? Because it's also quite a vast domain. You can be better at experimentation, but experimentation alone won't be enough to be successful in this role.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Mirela. Thank you, Mark, for the question. As we move to PLG, there might be risk on revenue. So what are the tactics one can use to convince C-level to start moving to PLG?
The companies I've seen do this successfully is that they've actually kept the sales team and helped them transition into the new part, and that then diminish the risk on revenue. Because you may also change some things in the product, but maybe those changes don't come fast enough, so you don't want to miss the earnings for a quarter. The companies who we've seen transition this successfully, which, for example, remove the commission of the salespeople, or basically say, hey, this quarter you're getting your commission regardless if you sell yourself or if the product sells that. And then freeing up a bit more time for them and also freeing them from this anxiety, they could actually help the product and engineering team figure out different tactics they could then automate into the product so that there's less need for manual effort from the sales team. And then also for the sales team to figure out what analytics and other indicators they need in place to understand if this is an account that they want to develop. Let's say you are selling a product and you're monetizing via licenses. You want to see at what growth rate some of these clients of yours have, because maybe some companies entering hypergrowth and then there's an opportunity to upgrade them on the next paid tier or introduce them to that, or they're crossing a threshold where they look like enterprise and you have some enterprise package, and more like that rather than manually trying to convert everyone. And at the same time, working towards relationship development on enterprise accounts, where there are a lot of questions from IT security and different compliance and governance topics that they're very interested in that may block different tools from being adopted. Hope that helps, but I wouldn't do this switch and have the revenue risk, because no one is going to let you do that. I would make it gradually, considering it also a little bit more expensive, let's say from the staffing perspective.
Right. Thank you, Miranda. So how would you apply bringing PLG to large, complicated companies like banks?
I mean, that is already something that has been proven, right? By digital first banks. Like on B2C, you have Revolut and Men26. And on B2B, you have a lot of examples, including last on Penta, who exited to Conto. So the model is already proven. Then would be also a question of what's the trade-off between ease of onboarding accounts and compliance, or like what can you show as a traditional bank that would make you interesting compared to the digital counterparts? Because I know that it can be pretty hard. And at least in Germany, what I've seen, the user facing experience of traditional banks it's quite subpar. So I understand the hurdles of that. But maybe there's also something that they have as a stronger point compared to the newer companies, which maybe it's underdeveloped in their compliance and risk part, that will then help the traditional company position there. And of course, you already have examples you can just take a lot of inspiration from as best practices. So you don't need to educate consumers anymore on how to open a bank account digitally. You already have a lot to build on and things that can make a business case internally. But I guess there the resistance is in between compliance and how are we going to control this complicated tech stuff we don't have a lot of knowledge of. And the other part, would it be worth the cost? Or because initially it's going to be more expensive. You're going to need to invest to develop that. You're going to need to bring new skills on board. But it's all doable. And I've seen cases where the transition worked. Usually you probably want to start it off as a separate venture so that it can move faster than the mothership and not any exposure in case some things or have limited exposure in case things don't go so well. And then later on incorporate that in the main offering.
Right. Thank you, Mirela. So one way you can do this is through generating interest from management and do some small projects that you run and show how you applied the methodology. So yeah, I think this is also an interesting. Yeah, I would also like to ask Mirela if you have any examples of European companies that have successfully adopted PLG.
Going back to the banking example, and also as a company founder, in Germany, you need a bank account before you can get going. And the process of some traditional banks that I won't name was so bad that there was some sort of typo in a printed form, and then it didn't go through. And at some point, a friend said, "Hey, use Penta and open an account." And I just did an KYC to the UI, and there we go. We have a bank account. I can now write to the net notary, wire the foundation capital, and so on. So it wasn't like something that they did wonderfully. They just were barely functional that I could get to a new URI and get a bank account for the company before opening others and diversifying. So I feel that, of course, Penta did some good things where they had this referral program and really easy copy and very good customer support, because this is something that N26 is lacking, and they've been losing people over that. It's the point where you can't get to a human, and there are like some automated processes that contradict each other and lock you out. So that's also the downside of having fewer people in the loop, is that like no one catches the user if the user ends up in some corner case that maybe someone forgot to test or to map out. But there are other things you can do relatively well, and there are already tactics you can borrow from across the board or across the industries from companies that did that. So I don't feel like convincing management would be such a hard task, considering people are generally looking at an example and saying, "Oh, this company is doing that. We should also do that." It's more of getting them to commit the money for a long enough time frame that you get to see the light of day, and you run this as a pilot long enough and it gets enough traction. So it would be more of doing a business case for it and being aware of how much it would cost. And that is not something that they can do in 2 weeks. I think that's the harder part. I mean, if management doesn't see that, then it's probably they should also look for something else, because they're missing out. But it's hard to get them to stay committed to that for longer, because they're going to be, "Oh, wait, we've invested this, didn't work. Okay, thanks, bye." I would rather see that more as a risk, especially in domains that are heavily compliant.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing the example. How would the objectives of sales team change when a company is like shifting to this PLG model?
They become more consultative. On one hand, supporting the product and engineering team into hardening the growth loops and figuring out what people convert, right? Because they've also been primarily in touch with the customers. Then understanding which accounts to target for manual upsells, so the ones that are growing fast enough, and at the same time have capacity freed up to target enterprise and larger clients where it's worth investing a person's time into having these conversations. And it may be harder to develop as an account due to different compliance and purchasing processes that take a long time. Whereas if it's a 10 people startup, someone can put in a credit card. It's not going to cost a lot. You can get going. They don't need to talk with a human and have a human screen shared and present some demo. They should all be able to demo it themselves, pay for it or trial it and move along. But if it's a 10,000 people organization with a lot of processes and compliance topics, potentially publicly listed or so, then of course you want more investment there because the size of the account is also going to be larger and their needs are more sophisticated.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Cool. Then it's a pleasure. And thanks a lot for hosting.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this Product People podcast episode. To check the full talk with video and to see the events from other guests, head over to our YouTube page. This was the last episode of the first podcast season, so if you have any feedback, please reach out to us. The second season will be out soon, and it will feature new original interviews with some of the biggest authors and practitioners in the product management space. Make sure to follow our show on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss it. See you next time.